Hello, my name is Bruce Gillette. I am the moderator of Presbyterians for Earth Care, a denominational group that is ecumenical in spirit and seeks to work with all God's children in better caring for God's creation. And we're very grateful to have all of you here, both those who are watching this live and others that will be watching the recording. And we hope the recording will be shared in a number of churches throughout the country. We'd ask you to continue to be muted, and you can even mute your video if you want. But when all the three presenters are done, we will welcome a chance for questions and answers. You can go ahead and put them in the chat ahead of time if you'd like. And after the three presentations, we'll try to give ample time for people to ask their questions. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Loving God, we give you thanks for this day that you have made. We give you thanks for the beauty of your creation. We give you thanks for all who seek to care for your creation. We're especially thankful for Dale and Madison and Mark and their gifts in helping us learn better how we can do that. Be with all who have gathered here and those who will watch these presentations later. Unite us in our care for your world. We pray it all in the name of the head of the church, our Lord and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. I could start that prayer actually giving thanks for the Congress and the President, because after many years, just recently, they passed historic legislation dealing with climate change with the misleading title of the Inflation Reduction Act. It doesn't sound like it's related to climate change, but it's done far more in providing funding and creative responses than we've ever had in this country's history. And it's going to dramatically change things, we hope, fairly quickly. And we're grateful to have three different speakers with us this evening. We can't cover everything, but we'll try to get answers if we don't have them tonight. Charmel, who is the executive director of the Arkansas affiliate of Interfaith Power and Light, and also a member of the steering committee for Presbyterians for Earth Care, has recruited a wonderful staff member from that national organization. Could you please introduce her, Charmel?
Well, I'm happy to. I was so pleased that Madison could be with us on the date that we selected for this gathering. So Madison Mayhew is with Interfaith Power and Light at the national level, and she is located in Washington, D.C., and her title is Federal Policy Advocate. So here's what I know about what Madison does. She keeps track of all of the pieces of legislation that impact environmental issues as they're being negotiated, and keeps the rest of us informed on what the status of each one is, and then lets us know the good and the bad of every piece of legislation that gets passed. Now, on the day that we were all waiting for the IRA to be passed, Madison was not sitting around at home waiting. She was on Capitol Hill all day long, waiting for the Congress to vote so that we would know that it finally passed. So anyway, she's going to give us an overview of the Inflation Reduction Act and especially the climate change provisions of that. So welcome, Madison. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It truly is lovely to be with you all this evening. I really appreciate the invitation. But again, my name is Madison Mayhew. I use she, her pronouns, and I am based in DC and serve as the national team's federal policy advocate. But as we get started, I wanted to take a step back and kind of give a brief overview of how we got here and the journey to pass IRA. So as I'm sure you're well aware, when Biden became president and took office, one of his top priorities was passing a bill called Build Back Better, which was a huge piece of legislation that included investments in social, infrastructural, and climate programs. It had support in the House and passed early in 2021, but it did not have the support in the Senate to get over the finish line. So eventually, Congress decided to separate the infrastructure pieces of Build Back Better from the social and environmental components, with a promise of passing the larger Build Back Better package at a later time. So we saw the infrastructure package get passed, and then a continued movement and action towards passing those those two other components and get them across the finish line. And although the infrastructure package had some really great wins for us, including funding for EV chargers, funding to clean up legacy pollution, investments in a 21st century electrical grid, it wasn't that robust climate bill that we really needed to address the urgency of the moment. So we saw a lot of back and forth between the Senate and the House to try to find some negotiations and middle ground to get those provisions across the finish line. It eventually became known as what's called a reconciliation bill, which is a very particular type of funding bill that allows the Senate to pass legislation with a simple majority and avoid the filibuster. As we know, Senator Manchin was very wishy-washy with his support around the climate provisions and eventually came to a place where he said, Build Back Better is dead. There is not going to be any climate legislation. And as can be expected, there's a lot of grief because it felt like, our short window of an opportunity to address the moment was gone. But little did we know that within a very tight group of people, there were negotiations still happening to get those climate provisions across the finish line. So a little over 2 weeks after Senator Manchin made his devastating announcement, we hear that Leader Schumer and Senator Manchin had come to an agreement on a reconciliation bill that we now know as the Inflation Reduction Act. And one thing that I find very fascinating about this moment is that the group of people involved in these negotiations were so small that 90% of people, whether that be senators or Hill staffers or longtime Hill advocates, were completely caught off guard by this announcement. We all thought that the moment had passed. And so there was a lot of energy and excitement to learn what was in the bill and kind of start digging into the weeds on what this new negotiation provided. And as something to remember is that the Inflation Reduction Act is not just a climate bill. It also helps to reduce healthcare costs and level the playing field with our US tax code. But in terms of the climate provisions within the Inflation Reduction Act, I think the biggest takeaway is that the bill provides significant funding for clean energy that will help us transition off of fossil fuels in a really tangible and significant way. And it's paid for by taxes on the largest billion-dollar corporations, many of whom do not pay taxes now. What's included in the bill are clean energy tax credits for wind and solar, electric vehicles, efficiency upgrades, heat pumps, and much more. It also allows nonprofit and public utilities to take advantage of direct payments from the federal government to move renewable projects along more quickly. There's $60 billion for environmental justice priorities, including block grant opportunities and funding to clean up ports. There's up to $60 billion for domestic clean energy manufacturing, which is huge because it increases our own energy security while providing increased opportunities for good paying clean jobs. There's a $27 billion for a green bank, which provides loans and other forms of assistance to support deployment of zero emissions technologies. And there's the first direct federal methane fee. And as people of faith who are, gathered here tonight in recognition of our love to care for our common home, there's certainly a lot in the bill we're celebrating. It's not what we had hoped for within Build Back Better, but it does retain roughly about 80% of the cumulative emissions reductions, despite a lower top line funding number, and remains the largest ever federal investment in climate action. There's some modeling that has been done that shows the IRA will help the US achieve emissions cuts of roughly 40% of levels before 2005, which is huge. It's also estimated that because of this bill, families will save an annual of a little over $1,000 in energy savings to help lower electricity costs and improve energy efficiency. All that being said, as people of faith, we also are deeply committed to pursuing justice and protecting marginalized and historically disenfranchised communities. And there are provisions within this bill that are troubling and concerning, mainly around expanding lease opportunities for oil and gas in the Gulf and some other places in the coast. And as you can imagine, because Senator Manchin was involved in these negotiation process, he himself profits millions of dollars off of coal, so he tends to be more in support of the fossil fuel industry. So that's what led to these troubling provisions to be included. But as we know, research is clear. The transition away from burning fossil fuels is urgent, and this bill lays the groundwork to make that happen for communities, families, and individuals. And I think, it's a really exciting moment, but the moment is not done. We don't have to get into the weeds here if there's not enough time, but there is a second component that will be debated in the next coming weeks around permitting reform that will continue, if passed, will continue to harm frontline communities. And there are opportunities for engaging on that and making sure that it is stopped. But that is a very brief and broad overview. If there are any specific questions about the IRA that we can get into, I'd be happy to answer some questions later.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Madison? Go ahead and put them in the chat. Bruce, would you like to introduce Dale?
Yes, we were just helping some folks that were having technical difficulties getting on. Dale Davis is a longtime solar contractor in the state of Delaware, otherwise known as the First State. The University of Delaware has faculty that edits their international journal on solar technology. And a few years ago, when our family was looking to get solar for our home in Delaware, I reached out. I think the professor's name is Steve Hedges. Does that sound familiar, Dale? Yeah.
Yeah, Steve's still there.
Steve edits the International Journal, very much an expert on solar technology. And the question I had from him was not a technical one. I just was, who's the best solar contractor around? And he recommended Dale Davis. And when I talked to state officials that oversaw these projects and did different fundings and whatnot, they also said Dale's company, CIM Electric, was the one to go for. So we did that for our home. We had an independent group of engineers and other technically skilled people research it when our church decided to do it sometime later, which meant Dale had to put up with all kinds of technical questions from the engineers. End of the day, they decided to award him the contract, and he put 180 solar panels on the Limestone Presbyterian Church, which was the first faith church congregation in the state of Delaware to go solar. He did it very well. People were very pleased with his work. And I think we were a great advertisement because we were on a state highway with lots of traffic going by and everybody asking about the panels. Down the road a little bit, the Methodist Church ended up getting not 180, but 500 solar panels. So, Dale, you know this information inside and out. Beyond his own company, he is the president of the statewide organization relating to solar contract. And I have a feeling he's had some conversations with people beyond the state of Delaware as well. So take it away, Dale, please.
All right. Well, thank you, Bruce. I appreciate all those words of praise. So the IRA has a huge amount of stuff in it for solar. We're still unpacking it. I mean, there's hundreds of pages in there, but there's some big takeaways. There's important pieces for residential solar. There's some really powerful stuff in there for nonprofits such as churches and those sorts of things. And there's stuff in there for the commercial side of solar. So I'll just start and work my way up, and you can give me the hook when you heard enough. So, probably the big thing for residential solar is the restoration of 30% federal tax credit. So if you install solar on your house anywhere in the country, you qualify for a 30% federal tax credit. And that's a direct credit against the taxes you would otherwise pay. That had started to decline. It was down to 26% this year, and it was on its way down to 10% over the next couple of years. The IRA has restored that to 30% retroactive to the first of the year. So now everybody who installs solar can get at least that 30% federal tax credit. There's also a very new provision for nonprofits. In the past, nonprofits such as Limestone Presbyterian didn't have a way to take advantage of that tax credit. If you don't pay taxes, you don't get a tax credit. It was pretty cut and dry, and it made it difficult for a lot of houses of worship to go solar. It just upset the finances of the project. But there's a new direct pay provision in the IRA now that essentially what happens is nonprofits get paid that tax credit, even though there's not a taxable. Yeah, that's fantastic. It's really good. By that alone should transform the ability of nonprofits now to go solar. There's also a transportability of the credits. So say a church that wants to go solar and could get paid the 30% federal tax credit still has difficulty coming up with the capital of doing that. Some third party could come up with that capital, and no longer does it have to be some huge commercial entity that doesn't want to look at the project unless it's gigantic, bigger than any church could put on your roof. Now it's down to the individual. So just an individual donor could say, hey, I'll buy those panels and I'll take that 30% federal tax credit and use it myself. And now that can happen. That's also huge, since there's certainly in faith communities people who want to participate in helping the church. So that's a big piece. From a commercial point of view, we're back up to the 30% federal tax credit, at least for this year. And then there's the ability now for commercial solar to either do that federal tax credit or to do basically the PTC, which is a feed-in tariff. So commercial entities can choose, I'll either take the 30% or I'll get paid per kilowatt hour I produce for the next 10, 15, 20 years, which can be better off for some situations, depending on, what kind of tax appetite they have, that sort of thing. So I think we'll see an increase there. But most importantly, on those commercial projects and also in community solar projects, there's some other provisions. One of those is an additional 20% credit for projects that are done in low-income areas. So for low-income communities, low-income buildings, and in certain tribal lands, instead of a 30% tax credit, it becomes a 50% tax credit. That should really help get some of the, we've had some, environmental justice issues where the low-income community has not been well served by solar. And I think this is really going to start to change that. We'll start to see a lot more solar in those communities, and those people being able to benefit more from solar than they have in the past. There's also another 10% credit. These credits just keep stacking up. There's a 10% credit for projects that are in what's called energy communities. And they're a little bit broadly defined. So energy communities are brownfields. So if you put a project on a brownfield, it's good for another 10% federal tax credit. If you put it in an area where there has been high employment in extraction industries, coal and gas, that there's an extra credit there on the theory that those industries are going to start to decline. They're going to sunset those industries, and this will help those areas, kind of recover a little bit from And there's also in those areas are places where coal mines have been closed, where coal-fired power plants have been closed, qualify for that 10% credit. And you think, okay, well, that certainly helps the senator for West Virginia to close coal mines. But that really, if you look at the race to natural gas for transformation of the electrical grid to natural gas, most of us live within a range of a closed coal power plant that has been transformed over to natural gas or otherwise shut down. So that's almost going to be every area. So I think there's really going to be a radical increase in solar. Then the other piece of it is the battery piece. So battery adoption as part of solar has been slowly increasing. There's been more and more batteries that have been incorporated into solar, primarily as battery backup. And that's because in order for your battery to also qualify for your federal tax credit, that battery had to only be charged from solar. And that meant that it was basically going to only get discharged as part of an emergency backup type situation. The Inflation Reduction Act allows those batteries to be charged from the grid, either in conjunction with solar or just purely standalone. That's going to be pretty transformative, because what's going to happen there is there's a lot of ability now to do grid support with batteries, either with or without solar, to charge batteries up during periods when demand's low and power costs are low, and then feed it back in when power costs are high, or to charge your batteries up during the day and then feed them back in with your solar during the day, and then feed it back in during the peak periods in the evening. And now that you have the ability to also do that without necessarily having to charge from solar, I think you're going to see a big rush in more batteries. That's going to help both with people who do want battery backup as part of their solar, but it helps with what we call arbitrage. And that's the ability to take advantage of time of use to reduce your demand charges on your bill that solar can't necessarily do. So just a lot of different things. I think those are probably the big pieces of solar in the IRA, but I'm sure I missed a lot, and I might have glossed over some knowledge that people might need to understand what I was just talking about. So Bruce, I'll let you, if I did that, go ahead.
Well, what I'm going to suggest is we're going to move on to Mark, who is a member of the PEC steering committee, and just out of love of the organization has bought not one, but 2 electric vehicles.
Nice.
And he's got good knowledge on them. We'll let him do his part, and then we'll open it up to questions. I have my own for you on the solar. I would suggest, if you can, both you and Madison, listen carefully to Mark, but maybe also look in the chat for the questions that are going to be coming your way that people have already posted. Okay?
All right. Thank you.
Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Bruce. And I was just pre-posting a link because I'm going to be showing something here in just a second. Let's see, do I have screen sharing capability?
You do.
I do. Excellent. Okay. So this is an article, and the URL for it is in the chat now, so you can look at it. It's from Electric, and it talks about what's going on in terms of about electric vehicles under the Inflation Reduction Act. And there's a simple 2-word analysis of what the act did. It's complicated. So the problem that we have is that it really is going to depend on which electric vehicle you're interested in. It's changed things dramatically. The IRA has because the way that it was set up and the way that the IRA is going to be providing opportunities for people to access EV credits. The good news is a lot of vehicles that didn't used to be, that had already sunsetted out because the company had sold too many vehicles, they're getting the opportunity to come back. The bad news is there's some vehicles, because of where they're made, that you're not going to be able to get a credit for. There are other vehicles that, depending on how much they cost or how much you make, you may not be able to get credit. So it's really complicated, the scenario. So let me go through a few key things. The good news, so we now have a December 2032 end date for the qualifying period. So it's really pushed this out and is going to be helping with the transition for a longer period of time. It used to be that there was a credit cap at 200,000 EVs. That has been eliminated. So this is the great news. So GM, Tesla, Toyota are again eligible. Ford was about to hit that limit. Someone else was getting close, I forget who, but that limit is no longer an issue. Now, if you were planning on buying an EV this year, you're probably okay because the law from the past still stays in effect, except there is one key provision that's already kicked in this year, and that is the EV must be assembled in North America. That is the one part of the act that went into effect upon signing of the bill, so upon enactment. So some folks like my daughter and her wife who have an order in for a Subaru Solterra, they're out of luck. They're not going to get the $7,500 because it's not assembled in North America, and there's nothing that can be done about that piece. For people who are buying any of a number of vehicles, I'll show you in just a second, that are made in North America, through the end of the year, things don't change. But in 2023 and in 2024, more things change. One of the really good news features is that you can get your credit up front at the dealer. So no longer waiting for your taxes. But it may be 2024 before that kicks in, just because they've got to figure out how to get that implemented. There's probably going to be a delay just because there's no mechanism to do that in January when it hypothetically starts. The other thing that's going to be coming in are these provisions about the amount of battery components coming from North America and the percentage of critical minerals that come from North America or countries with free trade agreements with the US. So that starts really changing the landscape next year. Now, the other thing, and that's 2024, I think that kicks in. I'd have to double check. The really nice new news is federal tax credit of $4,000 for used EVs priced below $25,000. So this is really going to help out a lot of people who can't afford to buy an expensive new EV and are looking to buy on the used market. The bad news is it doesn't apply to person-to-person sales. It has to go through a dealership. But this does allow for the used market to get into this. And it can be used once per vehicle. So the first owner can sell it to the second owner can get the $4,000 credit. There's nothing when it goes on to the next owner. So the other is we're going to be seeing limits on vehicle cost. So BEV cars will be limited to $55,000 and below. So if it's over $55,000, the tax credit doesn't apply. Vans, SUVs, and trucks up to $80,000. The new credit also expands to commercial fleet customers. So this is a really valuable piece for businesses. And the other is the EV tax credit is available to those making $150,000 per less individually, or $300,000 for joint filers. So there is a limit on income. So the great thing about all of this is it's going to expand this opportunity. It's going to extend it longer. It's going to complicate things. There are companies who are already scrambling to try and figure out how they're going to get their the minerals for their batteries from the correct sources very quickly, because a lot of those are currently coming from China. So it's going to be tough in the near term for a lot of companies and for a lot of buyers, but it's going to be good in the long term because these things are being pulled back to the US. Also has things about other pieces to it. There's a lot of complication here. I'm not going into all this, what percentage of minerals have to be in there and the battery components and so forth. What I'm going to do right now is jump to an important part of this, and that's those vehicles that would qualify under the latest tax credit. So right now, any of these all electric vehicles and list of plug-in hybrids down below, I won't go through all of those, but all of these vehicles will qualify and qualify right now for purchases through the end of the year. The Cadillac, if you can get a model of the Lyriq that is under the $55,000 cap, we'll see. The Chevy GM Bolts, the Chevy Bolt EV and EUV, two different versions, are both in starting in the $25,000 to $30,000 range, so that's great. Ford, the F-150 Lightning, certain trims that stay under the $80,000 cap. Mostly that's going to be the Pro, which is the very base unit, and the XLT, a little step up. The Mustang Mach-E, all but the high-end premiums and the GTs will fit. And the E-Transit is the transit van made electric, and that one qualifies. There's actually a Mercedes-Benz in here, but I don't think it's coming in under the price, but maybe they'll have a model of the SUV version that's cheap enough. I'm really not sure. Nissan Leaf is another of the low-end cost units, so that's going to be great. The Rivians, unfortunately, with their recent price increases, I think they're going to be priced out of the market next year. And Tesla, the Model 3 and Model Y for the very low end builds, you'll be able to get the credit on. The Teslas and the Chevys don't qualify until after January 1st because they currently are under the 200,000 limit, as is the Cadillac Lyriq. So there's a lot more in here, lots of other vehicles, lots of details. I'm not going to go into that, but the news, as I say, it's complicated as in terms of what's allowed, what isn't, and so forth. But in the long run, I think this is going to be a real good move and is going to be beneficial for the adoption of EVs in general. That's it.
Bruce, you need to unmute.
If you could get off your screen, Mark, that'd be good.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm just going to scroll down the chat here. Madison, what provisions in the IRA are there for congregations wanting to reduce their carbon emissions? We've heard about the solar. Are there other areas that can help churches in the IRA?
I believe that they are, and I know there's another question about this, but there's so much more about how individual homes can take advantage of these tax credits that it's a little bit harder to find those details about houses of worship and other buildings, but it's on my list and my radar to make sure to get the information to you. We have a contact who works specifically with congregations on the clean, the Energy Star within the EPA. And so I'm reaching out to him to see what resources we can share with you all, because I know there's a hunger to know what exactly those provisions are.
That would be good. And I guess another question, people ask how you get started. What I did beyond talking to the university professor who edits the International Journal was I talked to the area environmental groups like IPNL and Sierra Club and the other chapters of nationally respected environmental groups to say, who in your membership has used solar contractors and are pleased with them, and use those for references. I would hope IPNL would help organize the religious community by having a list of solar contractors by region posted on your national website. I think that would be really helpful, and I'd be enthusiastic in referring people to the IPL website, and then they can surf around and see all the other wonderful work you do. But if you could give a database like that, I think that could be very helpful of ones your organization supports. Dale, I'm sure you could refer us to a national solar organization that has a listing of contractors, right?
Yeah, so a lot of the states, since so much of this is state level based, both what you can do and what the grants are in various states. A lot of it comes there. There's an organization called solarreviews.org that kind of guides you around all the different, national wide that'll guide you to local contractors in your area. I know IPL is very active in Delaware, where we're based, and we get a lot of referrals from IPL here. I don't know if you know Schwetter or not, but truly wonderful, very involved person. So
Okay, let me just skim down here and see if I can highlight a few other things. Mark mentioned that there is going to be a webinar that's coming up on Tuesday just about solar, and if you look in the link, that is there now. Do you know what organization is doing that, Mark?
So it's being organized by Neighborhood Sun, which is a community solar provider. And so they'll be talking about things on a large scale and in terms of community projects and things like that as their primary focus. I don't expect that they're focusing on houses of worship. So whether they know more about that particular program, I don't know.
There is a question in the chat. Are tax credits available for the roof replacement that the solar is going on? Dale, you have any idea on that one, or Madison?
yeah, so I can help with that a little bit. Basically, those tax credits for a roof replacement have to be tied to why the roof's being replaced. It can't just be, we need a new roof, so let's get solar so we can get somebody else to pay for our roof. But a lot of times, like if we do like a bifacial solar panel, which actually can accept sunlight from the bottom of it also, and then put a white roof down, then we're improving the performance of the system, and then that white roof would qualify. So just some different ways you can do things based on what you're trying to accomplish.
Now, last I remember, solar panels were guaranteed for about 25 years. Is that still the average lifespan guarantee?
Yeah, the manufacturers will guarantee performance for 25, 30 years. That our experience has been they'll be performing well into their 50s probably.
And I had gotten a 50-year warranted roof on my house before Dale put the panels on, and I asked the roofer, is this going to compromise my roof warranty? And he said, not at all, because of the way they're able to install them. And point of fact, the roofer thought the solar panels would prolong the life of the roof because the roof isn't getting exposed to the sun, the wind, and all the wear and tear that causes the roof to diminish in its quality. So all kinds of good reasons to go with the solar panels up there. Some people are attracted to this idea of panels that look like tile, but last I heard they were not as productive as the regular, panels you put up on top of the roof. Are the tile solar panels any better or worse from your perspective, Dale?
They've gotten better. They're still not as efficient for the same amount of square foot, and they're still considerably more expensive. So today, they're still really more of an appearance issue than they are a economic or performance issue.
Okay. Somebody said, how do you get started? Talk to some other churches in the area or individuals who have them on their homes and get some education that way. I'm sure your local solar contractor will be happy to provide you with information. Presbyterians for Earth Care also have people that been there, done that as individuals and as churches, and are very willing to meet with a church's property committee, mission committee, with the session of a church, with individuals. We have plenty of people that have experience and can talk to you. And again, if we don't have the answers, we can tell you where we'll be able to get them pretty easily. Okay, let's see here. I think we've answered. Did I miss any questions in the chat? If so, if you can um, either raise your hand on the screen, but ideally raise your hand under the reactions. And if you raise your hand in the reaction at the bottom of the screen, that will put you up at the top of the screen. We have over 50 people on, so it's a little hard to make sure we catch everybody. If your video is turned off, we're not going to see you. I will also tell you, I mentioned we did it in Delaware, and then I was invited down the street to the Methodist Church. Dale, I think you did that one too, didn't you, on Limestone? St. Mark's. And they had a big production. Chris Coons, who's the U.S. Senator from Delaware, was there, and some other folks. And they invited me to speak because I had been helpful in the process. And I said they had bragging rights because they had the most solar panels in the entire state of Delaware on a faith church. And so, they were feeling very, very good. And I commended them. And I said, you are number one for having the most. The Presbyterians will always be number one as being the first ones to do it in the state. But then I went on to say the challenge for us all is to see how many of our church members we can get to go solar. And that challenge continues because you may remember the Avery Marsh song, "The church is not a building, the church is a people." So when we talk about solar panels on the church, it's also on the homes of individual church members as well. Earl Johnson, it's good to see you. What's your question? You're muted. We still can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Hello, Bruce.
Hello, Earl.
Haven't seen you since the peacemaking conference in Ghost Ranch a long time ago.
Been a few years.
Yes, I was going to ask Mark. I could download the article that you sent, but I couldn't figure out how to save it. I mean, I could open it, but I couldn't download it.
Well, the article I sent is just a regular website. So probably the easiest way if you want to have a copy is to do a print and save to a PDF. So you'll have a file on your computer or you could print it. The other option is, depending on which browser you have, that you're using, there are options to save bookmarks. So, there are ways to save whatever you're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Charmel?
I think Sarah Paulus is on this webinar. I think she's present, and she runs a program called Cool Congregations with Interfaith Power and Light, and she may have some information for us about the incentives that are offered to houses of worship who work to reduce their energy consumption, and awards that houses of worship can win. Sarah, are you there? Can you unmute? Maybe not. There is a Sarah. There she is.
Hey, hi, Charmel. Yeah, I can tell about the programs that IPL National offers to congregations who are actively working on reducing their carbon emissions. We have a certification program to highlight and honor congregations who have reduced their carbon emissions by 10% or more. It's a select group of people who can show their energy use has reduced. And we also have an annual contest that we call the Cool Congregations Challenge that has cash prizes. And the deadline every year is December 15th. And we now have 6 categories that you can apply in. Several cover energy saving of your congregational facility or your house of worship. And there are others like community inspiration, the work that your congregation has done to help others in your community reduce their emissions. And the latest category we've just added is for electric vehicles. And the electric vehicle category covers congregations who have taken action to encourage the adoption of electric vehicles. And it includes, the electric vehicles owned by a congregation for their staff, and how many their members drive, but it also includes education and outreach and advocacy around the adoption of electric vehicles. And you can see the winners from this past year's challenge on our website, coolcongregations.org, under the challenge. And you can read more about the certification program also on the coolcongregations.org website. We also have a free startup guide that you can download for congregations who don't quite know where to begin in reducing their carbon emissions, which has good information on how to form a green team to do the work and the basic steps that one needs to take to get started. And yes, I want to add a plug for our specialist for renewables, Jerry Bernstein, who has helped many congregations across the country get started on installing solar. And if you want to contact me at programs@interfaithpowerandlight.org, I can connect you with Jerry. So happy to answer any further questions.
Sarah,
Thanks
thank
so
you.
much.
Sarah, thank you. The program folks with PEC have been talking about doing an evening program just with IPL's Cool Congregations. So we will be talking to you and giving you a lot more time in the near future, I sincerely hope. Madison, before I call
Sounds
on
good.
you, I believe there was another Sarah who had her hand raised, but I don't see it now. So go
So
ahead.
Bruce,
Susan,
Susan Fuller has her hand raised.
Okay, she didn't do it in the chat, but go ahead, Susan, please.
And this is actually Doug Smithwood. I'm here with Susan, and I had a question for, I believe, Dale. I just wanted some details on the direct payment that churches or houses of worship could get for solar. In particular, say if you had a $100,000 solar array, would the federal government be paying directly to the solar installer, $30,000, so you wouldn't have to raise that money up front, or would you have to raise it and be reimbursed, which isn't nearly as attractive? So how does it work?
Yeah, so that's the not so much the direct pay, it's the transferability. So the direct pay means you can now have a payment for your 30% tax credit, but the transferability gives you the opportunity for that payment to go to someone other than the actual holder of the solar panels on their roof. So the short answer is yes, I think you will be able to do that. There's going to be 100 different ways of commercially getting this stuff done that shakes out of this as people get used to it. But I think you're going to see exactly that.
Dale, I think it'd be helpful to mention the price of this has dropped significantly as far as it comes to the actual panels and inverter. Labor, I'm sure, has not dropped, but when we had our project done 15 years ago, the price of panels has probably gone down 2/3 or 3/4 or something. So when people talk to folks that have had them for a while and they say, well, how much did it cost you? There could be a significant savings outside of IRA just because the materials cost less. Is that accurate?
Yeah, sorry, Bruce. If you were installing it today, it would probably cost 1/3 what it did back then. So yes.
Well, we wanted to get the carbon out of the air, so we were willing to make that sacrifice. Okay, Madison, you've been patiently waiting, and then I'll ask Jane. What's your question or comment, Madison?
thanks. I was just going to answer a question in the chat about what to do about the justice issues posed by the IRA, and there are a couple of things. The troubling provisions within the bill mainly focus around the expanded opportunities for oil and gas leasing, but there are also troubling provisions around expanding uses of hydrogen and cleaning carbon capture and storage. And hydrogen, as I'm learning, is an incredibly pollutive greenhouse gas, and can be touted as a clean energy option when in reality it's more harmful than some of the other pollutants that we typically engage with in our climate action. Within those projects, there are likely going to be some pipelines being built in the same way that oil and gas pipelines are built. In the same way that we have worked to stop the Keystone XL pipeline, there will be opportunities to stop and confront those projects to make sure that they don't happen. not to say that there isn't a real concern that they will move forward anyway, but there will be opportunities to engage those really troubling pieces. A second piece that I wanted to make sure to address was around this. You may have heard recently about this side permitting deal that was agreed upon with Senator Schumer and Senator Manchin to get the IRA across the finish line. As I mentioned earlier, the IRA is a reconciliation bill, so it has very particular language with what can be included in the bill. And outside of that, because of Senator Manchin's interest in supporting fossil fuel projects, there was this whole other piece that was agreed upon outside of the IRA that would be attached to the end of the fiscal 2023 fiscal year budget legislation that must pass at the end of September. Just a reminder, the federal government's budget will end in September, and as we've seen, Congress gets really wonky with how they pass budgets in the past several years, and they will either likely pass budget in September or pass what's called a continuing resolution, which will only fund a certain amount of time. This is getting really in the weeds. Just bear with me because it's really important. So the side permitting deal is likely going to be attached to this end of year budget that must pass. What's included in the side deal is some rollbacks of the National Environmental, I'm getting the acronym mixed up, but it's NEPA for short, that addresses ways that we can be involved in new permitting processes. It will also approve the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which has already been struck down, but would give it the green light. All of these significant changes that would continue to harm frontline and disadvantaged communities. So what we're asking is for Congress to decouple the permitting deal from the end of year budget bill that must pass in September. Because if we ask Congress to vote no on any bill that's connected, that would lead to a government shutdown. So we're asking the two to be decoupled so that we have a better chance of addressing the permitting deal and still allow the government to be funded. So I'm going to put, I hope that was clear, but if there are any questions about that, please reach out to me. We at IPL just put out an action alert that I'm going to drop in the chat that allows you to connect with your senators and members of Congress to make sure that they decouple that deal so that we can stop any permitting reform from further harming frontline and marginalized communities.
Thank you, Madison. I appreciate you putting the link in, and I hope people will read it and respond to it. I'm very grateful for that. I put in the chat a Truth Out article looking at some of the environmental justice issues in IRA. Jane Lapling is the vice moderator of Presbyterians for Earth Care and a resident of North Carolina. What question or comment do you have, Jane?
Yes, I'm asking this question for Tom Young, who is also on this call. Tom attends my church and he has been very involved in getting solar panels put on our church. We've been trying this for about 20 years now. We're still not there, but Tom has a great idea that he would like an answer to, and that is we have a wall of windows that get a lot of sunlight because they face south, and his thought is to have an awning over those windows with solar panels. And I think his question is this something that's already manufactured, or is that something we would have to do? Would we have to put something like that together, like have an awning built first and then put the solar panels on?
I'll take that one.
Good.
Okay, so there's a couple different ways to accomplish that. There's not a solar awning in a box kit that you can buy and do that for, but there's a lot of commercially available solar racking that you could do that with. It's not an uncommon thing to do. You can use panels nailed, a lot of solar panels, you can't see through them, but there's panels nailed that you can see through. There's still you still have the solar cells, but the spaces in the cells are clear and they let a lot of light through. So you can kind of to some degree control the amount of sunlight that filters into your windows. So if they're stained glass windows or whatever, they still light up the way you need them to be, but don't transmit as much heat. So yes, it's highly possible, but it is something that's relatively at least semi-custom. So you're going to want to work with your installer, who's probably going to involve some engineering to get it done.
Great, thank you.
You will make it easier for us to call on you if you turn your video on, and then down in the bottom of the screen, go to reactions and hit raise hand, and then you'll be at the top of the screen and we'll see you. We've got about half the people here with their screens off, so we don't even know who you are, or, so are there other questions or comments people have at this point? I remind you, we will be posting this on YouTube, and if you registered, as I'm sure you all did, Mindy will have your email and send that link out. Let me plug a couple of other things that are in the near future. September 1st is the International Day of Prayer for Care of Creation. The Orthodox Church started it, the Roman Catholics endorsed it, the Presbyterian Church USA endorsed it, the United Methodists, a number of denominations are on board for that day. PEC will be having a service at 7 o'clock Eastern time, and also providing resources for that for next week. So you can either do it on your own, join us for that on September 1st, 7 o'clock Eastern time, or you can join another service in your community. And that is the beginning of the season of creation. And we already had a webinar on that, and you can see a link to that and background information on the PEC website. The end of September, the 27th, which I believe is the last Tuesday in September, we are having a special program with a gifted minister who is now a chaplain in a children's hospital, previously worked as a church pastor working with children and youth, and has authored a book on the issues of children and youth and climate change. I do not have mine in front of me to flash. Mindy, by chance, do you have your copy of that book, Deep Waters?
I don't have it in front of me, but I'm about to put the link to the webpage for that workshop into the chat, and there's a picture of the book on the page. So in
Wasn't
one
that
second,
a nice pitch right to Mindy, so she could tell you all to sign up for that webinar? And if you have parents or grandparents that are concerned about how children are dealing with climate change, you will want to hear this speaker. The Lutheran publishing house Fortress has published her book, and it's gotten very positive comments. If you see in the chat, Madison is posting quickly a number of helpful things, including a blog post with a summary of everything covered today. We will have all of this and probably maybe an edited version of the chat there as well. Are there other questions or comments for tonight, friends? If not, it is 8 o'clock. What I'm going to do is ask Mindy to turn the recording off, and if our three presenters